Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Food for the Faithful channel with me, Bill Reimer, your reluctant prophet. I have a little more cerebral episode today because the only way that we're going to be able to defeat the enemy, our ideological opponents, is first of all to understand their ideology even better than they do. Moreover, that we must have statistical proof, demonstrative proof, as to its outcomes when applied. So today I posted a meme, quoting Kevin Sorbo, which read, "Instead of diversity hiring, how about giving the job to the best person?" The question he poses ignores the hideous cultural Marxist ideology behind critical theories, grievance studies, and DEI, since the dedicated neo-Marxist fully intends to destroy capitalism. And one of the best ways to do so is to undermine the competence required to make private industry successful. A Facebook acquaintance who himself grew up in the fascistic social collectivism of Portugal replied, "As a society, we have been forced to accept mediocrity. It's no longer a situation where people are encouraged to learn and get better so they'll be able to compete and get accepted or win. Rather, if you can't meet the standards, you're encouraged to file a grievance to get the standards lowered to meet your lack of qualifications. God help you if you complain that someone less qualified than you got hired or promoted ahead of you if that someone happens to be a member of a visible minority. But I'm sure I'm not telling you what you don't already know." I replied to him, John Rebello is the chap's name, that is because people fail to identify the source of the problem. Cultural Marxist critical theory lies behind all of this. Therefore, the job of any true freedom fighter is not to attack the symptoms of the illness, which in this case is mediocrity, but the source of the problem using first principles thinking. Deconstruct the ideology by understanding it better than your opponent, or it will deconstruct you, is what I wrote back to John. So let's discuss first principles thinking. It is a systematic approach to problem solving that involves breaking down complex problems into their most basic, fundamental parts. It's about understanding the core elements of a problem and building up from there, rather than relying on assumptions or conventional wisdom. Here's how a breakdown works. Here's a breakdown of how it works. Forgive me. A sip of tea. Number 1, identify and define the problem. Clearly understand what you're trying to solve. 2, break down the problem. Dissect the problem into its fundamental principles. These are the basic truths that are universally accepted and cannot be deduced any further. 3, analyze and synthesize. Examine these principles to find connections or patterns that can help you understand the problem better. Finally, 4, reconstruct the problem. Using these insights, reconstruct the problem and explore innovative solutions that weren't apparent before. This method encourages deep thinking and can lead to creative and original solutions. It's been used by many great thinkers and innovators, including Elon Musk and Aristotle, to solve complex issues and create groundbreaking ideas. It's not just a technique, but a mindset that challenges the status quo and fosters a culture of inquiry and innovation. By applying first principles thinking, you can cut through the noise of what's always been done and discover new ways to approach challenges. I provide all the links I used in the research to that below that section. Next subtitle: we are being confronted by anomalous patterns hitherto unseen. Humans are naturally wired to recognize patterns and irregularities in their environment. This ability has been crucial not merely to our survival, but also allows us to create stable civilizations which can predict and prepare for future events based on past experiences to avoid unwanted events which will negatively impact social cohesion, health, our children's education, and do damage to productivity, trade, and the economy. When something deviates from the expected pattern or norm, an anomaly, it will often trigger a sense of unease or discomfort, which is why so many feel unsettled in this post-COVID period, when so many of the questions surrounding the official narrative remain unaddressed or worse, are being subjected to an enormous, coordinated international cover-up. Such anomalies signal danger or uncertainty as to how our political and bureaucratic class, in league with international players from unelected bodies such as the WEF, other international organizations heavily influenced by illiberal foreign interference, such as from China, the EU, and WHO, and its parent organization, the UN. Next subtitle: The Need for Statistical Analysis of Our Ideological Crisis. You can only manage what you measure is an unerring principle of good governance and fiduciary duty, which is the duty of a fiduciary to act in the best interests of the beneficiary, in this case the citizenry. One is therefore forced to ask, why has this essential requirement of oversight and good government failed so miserably? Next subtitle: In statistics, mean, median, and mode are measures of central tendency. They are ways to find the center or average of a set of numbers. Here's a simple explanation of each. Mean: this is what most people commonly refer to as the average. You calculate it by adding up all the numbers in a set and then divide the count of the numbers. For example, for the set 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the mean is divided 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 divided by 5 equals 3. Median. The median is the middle number in a shorted list of numbers. If there is an odd number of observations, the median is the number right in the middle. If there's an even number of observations, the median is the average of the two middle numbers. For example, the set 1, 3, 3, 6, 7, 8, 9, the median is 6, which is the fourth number. But for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, the median is brackets 3 plus 4 divided by 2, which is 3.5. Mode. The mode is the number that appears most frequently in a data set. Now, this is where it gets interesting. A set of numbers may have one mode, more than one mode, or no mode at all. For instance, a set of 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, the mode is 2 because it appears twice, unlike the other numbers which appear only once. In summary, the mean is the total sum divided by the count, the median is the middle value, and the mode is the most frequent number. Each of these measures can give you a different perspective on the data set you're looking at. The term Six Sigma. My brother sold Six Sigma training in Asia Pacific, working for Motorola, which helped develop these principles, statistical principles. The term Six Sigma comes from a statistical concept used in manufacturing. When a production process is Six Sigma, also known as 6 standard deviations away from the specification limits, where problems and defects are produced, it means it is a very capable process and only produces up to 3.4 defects out of 1 million opportunities. If an I mode, which could refer to a peak, mode, or most common value in a distribution, is developing out near the wings of the Six Sigma distribution, It suggests that there is a significant amount of data or occurrences far away from the mean. In the context of Six Sigma, this could indicate a number of defects or errors, which is certainly troubling, especially in government, especially when it's happening in society writ large. Six Sigma methodologies aim to reduce defects and variations in process to improve quality and consistency. Anomalies or significant deviations from the norm, the wings of the Six Sigma distribution, can signal potential issues or inefficiencies in the process. This could be due to a variety of factors, such as changes in input materials, equipment malfunction, or human error. Therefore, when an I mode develops near the wings of Six Sigma, it is cause for concern, because it indicates a departure from the expected pattern and a potential decrease in process efficiency and product quality. It is a signal that the process may need to be reviewed and adjusted to bring it back into alignment with Six Sigma standards. All the links for the research for that below that section. Next subtitle. In light of this, let us examine the phrase which was so often used to force people to accept anomalies that pose an inherent threat to society: the new normal. The phrase arguing statistically the new normal refers to a situation where someone uses statistical data to argue that a recent trend or change is now the new normal. This can potentially lead to a logical fallacy if not handled correctly, which in our case it certainly did. One common fallacy related to this is misleading vividness or hasty generalization fallacy. This occurs when someone bases a broad conclusion on a small or unrepresentative sample size. For example, if there is a sudden increase in a particular type of event and someone argues that this is now the new normal, they might be committing a fallacy. They are drawing a conclusion from a potentially temporary or random fluctuation, not a statistically significant trend. Another related fallacy is po hoc ergo propter hoc. After this, therefore because of this fallacy. This is when someone assumes that because one event followed another, the first event caused the second. If someone sees a new trend and assumes is caused by a recent event or change, they might be committing this fallacy. Finally, there's the Texas sharpshooter fallacy, which occurs when someone focuses only on the data that supports their argument, while ignoring data that contradicts it, said Trudeau. I'm sorry, that really wasn't in there. If someone is arguing for a new normal, they might be cherry-picking data that supports their claim, while ignoring data that doesn't. In these cases, it's important to remember that correlation does not imply causation, and that statistical data needs to be interpreted carefully and correctly to avoid logical fallacies. All the sources for that research underneath that section in the blog. If you're listening to the vodcast, just click on the link in the notes and it will take you to the blog where you can see the sources for my research. Next subtitle, A Fool's Game. The ever-morphing versions of Marxist ideology. Cultural Marxism is an unfounded fool's game which leads to cultural genocide. I'll repeat that again. Cultural Marxism is an unfounded fool's game which leads to cultural genocide. There is not a single statistical, demonstrably provable, logical, or consistent aspect of applied cultural Marxist critical theory. Not one. In fact, it deconstructs itself due to its inherent contradictions. Therefore, we must outwit our ideological opponents by understanding not merely the impracticality of the ideology in theory, but in exposing disastrous outcomes the disastrous outcomes of its application. First, what we must do is never cede so much of an inch of ground to their preferred narrative. Rather, we must reject their narrative out of hand. Let us examine why the NDP-LPC coalition is a neo-Marxist criminal cartel aimed at further marginalizing the dispossessed while gutting the middle class. In an article from the Fraser Institute entitled Canadian Living Standards Declining with No End in Sight, which appeared in the Hill Times on May the 24th, 2024. And I'll read from that article. According to a recent poll, 2/3 of Canadians believe the economy is headed in the wrong direction. Clearly, there is a disconnect between economic statistics, which show the Canadian economy is growing, and the experiences of Canadians who feel like they're falling behind. In reality, Canadians are on the cusp of the worst decline in living standards in 40 years with no end in sight. When we measure in aggregate, the Canadian economy is growing, albeit weakly. In 2023, the economy grew by 1.1% after adjusting for inflation. And so far this year, it grew by 0.5% in January and 0.2% in February. But these statistics don't account for changes in the population. It's possible for the aggregate economy to grow because more people come into Canada from immigration, unrestrained immigration, while per-person income levels decline. This happens when the growth in the overall economy is insufficient to account for the growth in the number of people in the economy. And unfortunately for Canadians, this is exactly what is happening now. In 2023, Canada's population grew by 3.2%, or nearly 1.3 million people. The highest annual population growth since 1957, and nearly 3 times the rate of inflation-adjusted economic growth. According to a new study, from the second quarter of 2019, well before COVID, to the end of 2023, Canadians experienced a decline in living standards, as measured by per-person GDP, inflation adjusted. Except for one fiscal quarter of reprieve, this 18-quarter period represents the second longest period of per-person GDP decline over the last 4 decades, exceeded only by the 21-quarter decline from the late 1980s to 1994. But critically, the current decline, based on the latest data available for the end of 2023, has not yet ended and may extend into 2024. Moreover, the percentage decline in living standards, again as measured by per-person GDP, is the third steepest of any decline over the last 4 decades, at minus 0.3%, or minus 3% rather, exceeded only by declines from the late 80s to the early 90s, and from 2008 to 2009, which both eclipsed 5%. But again, the current decline has not yet ended, and we could see continued declines in living standards when the 2024 data is released. Simply put, Canadians could be experiencing the worst decline in living standards of the last 40 years. Several leading economists have already raised alarm bells over our economic decline, including Carolyn Rogers, Senior Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada, who recently said it was time to break the glass to solve Canada's productivity crisis. Isn't that funny? That productivity is invariably a sign of economic growth. People are working less and less and producing less and less. And no wonder. given the fact that hiring requires hiring the least competent and the least productive, as was the first assertion in today's vlog and blog. Unfortunately, despite for calls for genuine reform, the federal and provincial governments this past budget season largely maintained the status quo and continue to borrow and spend, with no government demonstrating its intransigence more than the Trudeau government. That required a large sip of tea. In conclusion, it might be appropriate to note that something similar, but not as severe, occurred under Pierre Trudeau, whose Marxist sympathies were celebrated by every social democracy around the globe. His premiership led to enormous interest rate hikes in the 1980s, where many lost their homes, just as we're seeing today. Therefore, our ideological crisis has been long in the making, since for far too long, Canadians failed to realize the threat posed to Canada by cultural Marxist ideologues in our universities, in politics, and in our enormous and bloated bureaucracy. And there is nothing normal about our social and economic situation today. This anomaly is an I mode warning us of the impending disaster. We must dare to use first principles thinking and Six Sigma quality methods, not merely in manufacturing, but also ensuring that our governing class takes their fiduciary duty seriously, or suffer the wrath of the citizenry, and not just on election day. These corrupt neo-Marxists must be held accountable in a court of law. From the book of Ecclesiastes, Chapter 5, verses 8 to 9 in the King James Version. Verse 8 rather. If thou seest the oppression of the poor, and violent perverting of judgment and justice in a province, marvel not at the matter, for he that is higher than the highest regardeth, and there be higher than they. Verse 9. Moreover, the profit of the earth is for all. The king himself is served by the field. As Sir Edward Coke said to the king, for Magna Carta is such a fellow as will have no sovereign. Even the PMO is not above the rule of law. We have desperate things to pray about in this country. But here's some good statistical first principles thinking analysis of why we've arrived at where we have. Quit playing whack-a-mole by only looking at the symptoms of the illness. Look to its root cause and deconstruct it. God bless you all. Have a wonderful May 27th afternoon.